I set up working with cancer in June 2014. I had breast cancer in 2005, and at that stage I was working as a human resources director at a large firm in the city. And I found returning to work after cancer, managing cancer and work was really difficult. And I realised that if I was having problems when I was the HR director, how might this be affecting people who weren't as senior or as knowledgeable about HR as I was. I think one of the most important things for cancer survivors to be aware of is that we are all protected by something called the Equality Act 2010. And the Equality Act protects cancer survivors from discrimination in employment from the point of diagnosis for the rest of their lives. So it doesn't just cover the period when you're ill or the period just after treatment, it's forever. And the other thing to be aware of is that that means that you're protected in terms of recruitment, training, promotion, terms of employment in general, so how you're paid, how you're appraised at work, how you leave work, and even protects you in terms of the references that are supplied about you after you've left work. Top tip number 1 is to understand your rights, and there's plenty of information on the web and on our website at Working with Cancer which will inform you about your rights, so be aware of that from the outset. The second tip I would give you is to talk to your employer about your diagnosis and potential treatment as soon as you are aware that potentially you're going to have cancer treatment. I think the more open and honest you can be with your employer about what's happening, the sooner that you can get the support you need from your employer and get the protection that you need. The third thing I would say is that you should expect the unexpected. So cancer treatment can be a bit of a roller coaster. You may have certain expectations as to how you'll be or how you'll feel, and all I'd say is that things never quite work out as you expect. So try not to commit to doing things, particularly in the early stages of diagnosis and treatment, if you don't know how you're going to feel, either physically or emotionally. And as I say to all the people I work with and we work with at Working with Cancer, over-communicate, so talk about your cancer as much as you can so people know how you are and what help you might need, but under-commit. In other words, don't make promises. So don't say things like, yes, of course I'll get that done by that date, because you may not be well enough to do so. The first time is when you're pretty clear that you're going to need some time off. You've been given the diagnosis and you may not have started treatment, but you know that you've pretty much got cancer. And it's important then to sit down with your employer. This isn't a passing conversation in the corridor. You sit down and you talk about the fact of your diagnosis and at that stage what support you need. You may need lots of information if you're employed about sick pay, health cover, things like that. So it's an important time to make your employer aware. And at the same time, the other important question to deal with is how far you want your colleagues or your clients or other people you work with to know about your situation, because I think it's important that you agree with your company, it might be your line manager or HR that you're talking to, what you want said about your current situation. The second time to have a conversation is at the point when you know you're going to be away because you're having surgery or chemotherapy or radiotherapy or whatever your treatment is. And that's the time to talk about cover arrangements and again what's said about your absence from work and how you want to keep in touch. Some people want to continue working through treatment. Some people don't want to work at all, but quite happy for people to call them at home. So those are sort of important issues to discuss at that stage. Stage 3, which arguably is the most important time to be talking to your employer, is a few weeks before you're due to go back to work after treatment's finished. Because at that stage, you should be talking about your phased return to work, reasonable adjustments, again, what cover arrangements might be needed while you phase yourself back in, and again, what you want said about your return to work and the hours you'll be working, how you feel about talking about your cancer to colleagues. So all those things you should be discussing at that stage. Then the 4th time is actually once you're back at work. So that means I think it's important to have a conversation with your employer, maybe once a fortnight. How are the adjustments you've made working out? How's your phased return going? Do you want to speed things up? Do you need to slow things down? Are there things that people are doing or saying that don't work for you? So a fortnightly meeting with your manager or HR or both together, that's an important thing to keep up, possibly for as much as 12 months or longer. And if you don't think it's necessary, you can always cancel a meeting, but if you have it in the diary as a regular catch-up, then that means you will continue talking. The other thing I would mention is it's really important to plan those conversations. So if, for example, somebody stops you in the corridor, your boss or HR, and says, we need to have a talk about what's going to happen while you're away, why don't we do that now? I would actually hesitate before agreeing to that, because I think it's important you plan what you're going to say or what you're going to ask for before you go into those meetings, and also make sure you'll be able to take notes during those meetings. So any questions you're going to ask, write them down in advance. You might want to practice asking those questions in front of the mirror, or even using an iPhone to record how you're asking them, just to give you some sense of what you're saying and how it sounds to you. I say when you're in the meeting, make sure you take a note, or again, record with permission, record what's being said, because I can tell you now very often in those meetings you can feel quite emotional and you might not quite hear what people are saying to you. What I would also add is after the meeting, try and write an email or letter to the people you've been speaking to set out your understanding of what's been agreed, so you're all clear from the outset what both parties have signed up to.